Wait! I'm a what? Written by Artina Blackcharm. Chapter 8. So let me ask you a question. Summary. Danny actually doing something for himself? Who would have thought? Grundy was very familiar with sewers and death. He died several times and the sewers didn't mind so much, unlike the top side. Each time Grundy came back a little different. Sometimes all he felt was anger and the sensation of hitting something with his fists. Grundy was good at fighting, but eventually something got him in the end, and he'd come back different again. Sometimes he felt cold like a stone, while his mind was sharp. He remembered things he'd rather forgot. Those times always had a precedent ache. With the understanding came pain, and anger at the realization what had been done to him, and the mistakes he had made. Hindsight was a cruel thing, but there were a few times when he returned, things felt simpler. Grundy knew his mind wasn't as sharp as before, and people treated him as such. People always changed with him, though they were always afraid and wary. Those times he just wanted to get away from them. He didn't want them to look at him with that look. He hated that look. So he went down to the sewers. They were familiar. The only rules down below were the ones he made. Not many people were down there to look at him in the way he hated, or to start a fight he didn't feel like having. He was content to wander, to see the different parts of the tunnel, and whatever lay hidden in the cracks and dark. If he was lucky, he'd run into Waylon. Grundy used to fight Waylon, but he just smiled and joked. Waylon would tell him that he had finally found a good fight. Grundy knew that Waylon liked a good fight. He was good at it too, like Grundy, though Grundy never bit anyone like Waylon did. His teeth weren't as sharp. Like Waylon didn't look at him like others. He seemed to hate that look too. Waylon didn't go away even when Grundy came back, differently. Each time Waylon would look at him and nod. He accepted whatever change had occurred, though when Waylon didn't like Grundy's new plans, he didn't get in the way or try to kill Grundy to make him change again. Grundy liked that about Waylon. He liked how Waylon had come out of Arkham and greeted him like normal when he came across him on the ground. He dropped right back into old habits, caught up with him, even though it had been a while since they last saw each other. This time Grundy thought that Waylon was a bit simpler too. He watched Waylon go about the sewers with no big plans, nothing pushing at him like Grundy. Waylon seemed content to wander the sewers and even just listen to the rhyme that Grundy never forgot. Always a little in the background, the rhyme of the way he walked and talked. It reminded him of a lullaby. Waylon didn't mind Grundy and didn't brush him off about what he found. He asked questions and listened to what Grundy had to say. He talked and laughed with Grundy. He didn't get mad at Grundy for the way he talked. It was nice. Grundy was going around the sewers again. He was in a part he hadn't been before in a while. Close to where Waylon sat, Red Hood did his business. He didn't want to go topside. Fighting the Bat's orders would make him change, and Grundy didn't feel like doing it again so soon. So he kept on below and walked, trying to memorize the different routes. Maybe he'd find something interesting or useful. Waylon kept coming back with all sorts of things, and Grundy started to do the same, bringing back whatever caught his eye. There was an interesting design carved in the wall when he sensed something down the tunnel. Death, so very familiar, and Grundy wondered if it was time for him to change again. He hadn't even gotten to say goodbye to Waylon, who had just come back from Arkham. But the more Grundy focused, that the feeling wasn't like all the other times. Other times Death felt big and warped around him, like curtains drawn or a blanket pulled over his head, blocking the light. But as he walked towards it, because there was no escaping death, Grundy felt that this time death was small, little death. Little death was coming down a ladder. Grundy thought he'd show Balin. Little death didn't seem to mind, and Grundy made sure to hold them carefully. Balin was looking at Danny, hanging upside down in the sewers, showing no sign of discomfort, with a smile again. "Who is your friend?" Danny asked, and before Balin could even respond, Grundy was already answering. When he spoke, Danny gave him his full attention. Solomon Grundy, born on a Monday. Grundy began like so many times before. His voice was deep, yet calm, following a rhythm of a poem. Christened on a Tuesday, married on a Wednesday, took ill on Thursday, grew worse on Friday, died on a Saturday, buried on a Sunday. That was the end of Solomon Grundy. Doing the nursery rhyme, Danny only bobbed his head with the cadence of Grundy's words. It was odd to see the motion while he hung upside down, but it didn't look like Danny was struggling. Instead, just like he did with Waylon, Danny simply said, "It's nice to meet you, Solomon Grundy. I'm Danny." Grundy grunted in acknowledgement. The tension in Waylon slowly dissipated. "Danny, what the hell are you doing here?" "Came to see you, of course," Danny said like it was obvious. "I had a question." Waylon motioned for him to go on with his head as he sat down on an old crate. "What should I buy for myself?" Danny asked. Out of all the questions Waylon was expecting, that was not one of them. Usually someone didn't enter the shores and let himself be grabbed by the infamous Solomon Grundy for that. It was such a simple question too, something you would ask a friend or family, but here Danny was asking Waylon while still hanging upside down from Grundy's grip on his leg. "I wanted to buy stuff for Eric or Beth. It's going to get cold soon," Danny commented, like it was the reasonable thing to do. "But Sandra said she'd snitch on me to old man Alshay, and I don't want something else to be thrown at me in a weird, carrying way that apparently old men do." Waylon only recognized one of those names. "Kid, what do you need?" "Nothing," Danny answered, with no hesitation, and a surety that shouldn't have been there. There was a threadbare shirt covering a very scrawny torso and jeans that had a few holes not there by design, along with ready shoes where the sole was already bleeding away. When Danny didn't say anything else, Grundy poked him in the stomach. "Grundy don't believe what Grundy said," Waylon agreed. "I know there's a list of shit that you probably need." Danny shrugged. "Well, I don't have that shit list on me at the moment." Waylon rolled his eyes. He was reminded of the snark he heard throughout the years from an array of all sorts of people. A few Robins came to mind. It didn't help that Danny looked pleased with himself, if his smile said anything. Waylon shook his head. "You stay there. I will get you your shit list. You little jit." He got up and headed over to where he kept more of his delicate items, like paper. Meanwhile, as Waylon went through his things, Grundy stared closely at Danny. Danny tilted his head. When he looked back, Grundy mirrored his action. "You know," Danny said softly, "I died on a Saturday too." Grundy hummed before he began to repeat the nursery rhyme, and then he bobbed his head again, while he still hung upside down. Adrian was walking down the street when suddenly one of the manhole covers started to move, and a small dark figure emerged. He froze, preparing for the beginning of a possible rogue attack, but when the figure stood up, Adrian recognized the blue-knitted hat they were wearing. "What are you up to, Bright Eyes?" he called out, and sure enough, Danny turned around, while kicking the manhole cover back into place, easily, like one would shut a door. "Just getting a shopping list." Danny waved a piece of paper and walked over. "From the sewers?" Danny nodded. "Waylon made it. Just visited him to meet one of his friends. Now," he showed Adrian a list and pointed to one of the items. "Where would I get warm fucking clothes?" Aiden ended up leading Danny to where Beth was camped out in an alley. She didn't yell out any sort of greeting, but looked up when they got close. "Beth always knows where to get the good stuff," Aiden said to Danny, before he grabbed the list and held it out to Beth. "Bright Eyes here," he gestured to Danny, "needs a guide." Beth eyed Aiden for a moment before she took the list and went over it without a word. Then she stood up and handed it back to Danny before beginning to walk away. Aiden smiled and clapped Danny on the shoulder. "All right, just follow her and you will get what you need." Danny followed Beth to a number of stores. When Adrian had left him alone with her, she hadn't spoken. She didn't tell him where they were going, and he didn't ask. He already knew Beth was most likely the quietest person in the neighborhood. He usually saw her hanging around Joe. The two of them listened to the radio. It was just another normal thing, like how Aiden and Patty would sometimes fight. Everyone had their thing. Silence was Beth's, and she seemed perfectly happy with that. It also made getting opinions go pretty quickly. After entering a small shop where the owner recognized Beth, Danny was let loose to choose items. He'd pick a few shirts and go back to where Beth had taken a seat in a well-loved armchair. He'd hold out the shirts and she'd either shake or nod her head, which was good because Danny knew he was a bit horrible at picking clothes. He remembered how Tucker and Sam had taken him for a makeover, according to them. He wore the same thing particularly every day. Tucker said he felt like he might have been in some weird Groundhog Day, and they needed to switch it up for his own sanity. The pants were a bit easier. He got 3 pairs of jeans and 2 pairs of cargo pants that reminded him of Tucker. Danny had just placed them on the counter to pay along with the shirts when Beth came by and set down 2 pairs of shoes. One of them was a pair of Converse that were in much better condition than the ones he currently wore. The other pair was black combat boots. They reminded him of Sam, and he gladly accepted them. He also got some basic necessities that he made to sure keep out of Beth's view. The color of your underwear should be kept secret in Danny's opinion. When they left the store, Beth led Danny to a little restaurant that he had no idea existed behind a laundry doormat just 2 blocks outside the neighborhood. He took another bite of rice and chicken. He looked at Beth enjoying her drink, and in the most sincere voice he could muster, he said, "No one should ever doubt you as a guide. If they do, just send them my way." Beth smiled, and then he ate another bite. He felt content, and even more so when he noticed that the cough Beth had earlier was gone. After eating, the last thing on the list Valen made was get something you like, hobbies and that shit. At this, Danny told Beth she didn't have to guide him anymore. He didn't want her to stay out for too long, and it would take a while seeing as he wasn't really sure what he would get. Once alone, he just walked around, trying to figure out what exactly he would buy for himself. He wondered what hobbies Valen might have. Then he was imagining if maybe Valen liked board games, like Frostbite did when something caught his attention. It was a little twinkle, something that caught the light for just a moment. There was a small shiny telescope in the window of a store. Telescopes were nice but particularly useless in Gotham, considering the ever-present sky cover. Except the store didn't just sell telescopes. It was one of those hobby stores. There was even a sale going on. Perfect! When Beth came back, the others were in the building. They all looked at her, interested to see how the shopping trip with Danny went. Aiden had already shared with them that Danny was supposed to get stuff for himself, which was a surprise until Eric had stopped by and gladly told them Sandra's threat. A few questions were thrown Beth's way, but it looked like Joe was the only one she actually answered. Not that they heard her. And of course Joe didn't share anything either way. Some of the kids liked the joke that Beth and Joe were telepathic at times. Oh, come on, Joe, Patty said in a sing-song voice, and it was only when she came close to poke at him that Joe told her that Danny wasn't done shopping yet. It was 2 hours later when the doors to the building were pushed open with a loud bang, and Danny rushed in. Everyone jumped up at the sudden commotion, ready for something to be following Danny with how he ran inside, but none of them saw Fred behind him. Instead, Danny rushed upstairs with 2 bags. He disappeared from sight, only to reappear a moment later as he came down the stairs, jumping down the last few steps. His landing wasn't audible. He went outside and came back with a pile of boxes in his arms, an unstable tower that had a few boxes fall as Danny rushed back upstairs. Aiden could read star decorations on the side of one of the boxes that fell, and saw that the others were the same. Just how many boxes did he get? I think I saw him holding 4 boxes upstairs, Zipper said, as he came down the stairs. Then he reappeared behind them, still in a rush. Going down the stairs, he quickly gathered up the fallen boxes and headed back upstairs, narrowly avoiding crashing into Zipper. With all the stars he's bringing here, better call this the observatory, Adrian said. Suddenly, there was what sounded like a crash, and Danny was there at the bottom of the stairs, standing next to Zipper, who was startled. He was looking at them with a wide smile and still holding at least 2 boxes tightly to his chest. His eyes had a bit of a shine to them. Hadn't he just been upstairs? Patty laughed at Daddy's expression and looked at the others. Ah, he seems to like that, she said teasingly before looking back at Danny. Don't ya? Danny's fingers seemed to dance lightly, tapping an unknown rhythm on the boxes. Somehow his eyes looked even brighter, though not the imitating glow they saw when he confronted Dawson in the gas attack. This glow was softer, somehow, and the longer they all looked at it, the more they couldn't help the smile growing on their respective faces. For some reason, most of them could feel an unfamiliar joy growing inside of them. When it didn't look like Danny would actually answer anytime soon, it was Zipper who nudged him to finish taking his boxes upstairs. At his retreat, the feeling of joy dimmed down, but the sensation of lightness remained. The Wayne Manor was noisy, as it usually was, with the attendance of the family dinner Alfred instituted and upheld, with just one raised eyebrow. There was comfortable chatter around the table as they ate. It was disgustingly domestic, and Jason would keep it to himself about how it made him feel warm inside. Of course, the look Cass gave him from her seat made it clear that he didn't fool her. No one ever could. He rolled his eyes and put a finger on his lips. Cass gave him a nod in return before turning back to the others. Little Wing, what about the shootout that happened? Dick asked. Jason sighed. He wasn't surprised that somehow Dick heard about it, even though no one was really talking about it on the streets. It was 2 smaller groups that have been quiet. No drugs got out. Cops haven't said shit. Sorry, Alfred. Pretty sure some dirty ones were involved. No surprise there. He listened to Dick and Duke offer their theories, and what little bit of information Tim had searched up about it. Eventually, the conversation drifted to other events and stories about things that had happened since the last family dinner, where everyone was there. It was a comfortable rumble of chatter before Jason heard Bruce mention a specific drug dealer that had been brought in a bit more roughed up than he liked. He ignored how Bruce had glanced at him pointedly. Jason shrugged as he took another bite. He could still remember how the kids cried when he found their mother in the kitchen. Mattia found Franklin Snape after a few days, dead tired and a bit lighter on cash, but Jason hadn't cared about that. Franklin didn't really want to talk much at first, but he was a lot more talkative after a broken bone or 2. A few unsavory names were mentioned along with a vague foreboding sense that maybe some shit would be going down in the next upcoming weeks. Jason hadn't liked the sound of it. Of course, Bruce wasn't the biggest fan of how he dealt with it. There was a distinctive humph from Alfred, and Jason smirked while taking a sip of his drink, as Bruce was effectively shut down from scolding him any further. The conversation quickly moved on to the next topic of a hobby shop Tim liked for his photography hobby that was closing down. Jason could feel Cass looking at him again. She looked amused. He stuck out his tongue at her. He got the same in return. He'd have to bribe her with some of Alfred's cookies later.